So a big applause to our first speaker, Onur. Sorry, okay.
He's also a rockstar like you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I'm really excited to be in Bulgaria, Sofia, for the first time and at this conference. Also a bit nervous, so bear with me. Now, the title of my talk, they asked about hot takes, so I had to come up with a hot title. It's that your tech stack doesn't matter. And when you hear this, you are probably thinking it's a talk about how AI is going to make programming obsolete and take all of your jobs. It's not about it, although it might possibly be true. Instead, it's about my personal journey of becoming a software developer, a programmer, after the age of 40, after a long career in marketing, and some of the hard lessons that I had to learn along the way, and hopefully share these lessons with you so you don't repeat my mistakes, although you probably will. So, if you are working on a side project, or if you are trying to build a business using Ruby or Rails, I hope you'll get a lot of value out of this talk. If you are new to Ruby or have been exploring, I hope you'll get excited about it. And if you're experienced and not working all of this, then I guess just wait for it to finish. A little bit about myself. My name is Onur. I'm originally from Istanbul, Turkey. I've been living in Singapore for more than 15 years. And throughout pretty much all my career, I've been working in marketing. Now, I've worked in some agencies. Some of them were quite small, and some of them were big names like RGA. I've started some companies. I've had an e-commerce startup in Singapore. I've also set up a small digital studio doing websites for clients in Istanbul, Turkey. I went to the dark side for a couple of years. I worked in the corporate finance industry. I worked in payments in Mastercard and American Express. And finally, I've got some community involvement. I helped to organize the Ruby SG meetups in Singapore, as well as run a co-working session for indie hackers called Hackapura. Now, Singapore is a city of 6 million people. It's quite diverse. It's got great foods, and I've lived there for already 10 years at the time, and this is about 2019. And I just got married, and I left my job. We traveled around a bit, and my wife ended up getting a job in Switzerland. So we went from this to this. It's a tiny village of 600 residents in the French-speaking part of Switzerland. The problem is I don't speak French. So nobody wants to hire me for marketing jobs, and I don't really want to go back to the corporate world either. So I started doing some light consulting work, but my heart's not really in consulting either. So I told to myself, and this is around the time my midlife crisis is kicking in as well, so I thought to myself what everybody in my situation would think, which is, I'm going to build a SaaS. The problem with this is, and I distinctly remember thinking, how difficult could that possibly be, right? Turns out it can be quite difficult. So if somebody at this point came to me and asked me for advice on how to build a startup, I would give them a couple of pieces of advice. The first thing I would tell them is, please do not go rush into building things. Build as little software as possible, refrain. The second thing I would tell them is talk to as many potential customers as you can to understand about the problem that you are trying to solve before you come up with an elaborate solution. Finally, I would probably tell them it's probably going to take a bit of time for you to build a business and a brand out of it. So if you're just doing it and expecting quick result, it's probably not going to work. It turns out it's much easier to give advice to other people than to follow it yourself. So the journey begins. The first project I had in mind, in Switzerland, there's this, it was quite trendy at the time, this concept called natural wines. It's wines that are made with as little intervention and chemicals added as possible. And I was getting interested into it, and I decided to build a website that features some of these winemakers as well as the places that you can drink these wines. And it was a simple website with some content, some pictures, and I thought this would have a few community features as well, where people would be able to rate some of these places and maybe bookmark them for later and so on. The first question I asked myself, what tech stack do I use? And does anyone remember Jamstack? That was a thing for a while. So I decided to go with Jamstack because it seemed to be the cool thing to do around 2020. And the coolest framework at the time was Next.js. So I was like, okay, I'm going to build it with Next.js. Turns out, in order to use Next.js, you need to learn about React. So I went down rabbit holes trying to learn about React. But it turns out, in order to learn React, you also need to know about JavaScript. And from what I remember about JavaScript, it had changed with ES6. So I went down this rabbit hole as well. This whole process took about 3 months, and I was like, okay, now I know everything I need to know to build a website. Let's go ahead, build this. But it was not so simple. I mean, getting some content and putting static content on a web page is easy, but once you get into a little bit of authentication and having a database to store all of this data, it started to get a little bit complicated. With the JavaScript world, in order to store the data, you need to find a solution, and then you need to be able to access that data, and you need to be able to secure and provide some sort of authentication for that data. And if you want to integrate with other tools, you need to somehow expose that data as well. And it turns out in the JavaScript world, you either need to patch together a whole bunch of libraries, or you need to pay some VC-funded company a lot of money to solve these problems. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm not going to do this. This sounds way too complicated than it needs to be. But from my early days trying to build websites, I remember these problems were solved like 20 years ago. We had this thing. There was this guy who built a video, a 5-minute to build a blog. And I decided to go looking a bit deeper into Rails. The other reason I went down this path is because I look at some of the companies that I really like. These are small companies that are either solo founders or a few people building bootstrap SaaS businesses that are running $1 million in annual revenue or maybe more. I was like, okay, I'm going to go all in on Ruby and Rails, and this is going to be the only stack that I'm going to use from now, and I'm going to refuse, ideally, writing any JavaScript from now on. So it started off well. Initially, I had some questions, though. It was not all rosy. There was a bit of a steep learning curve. Like, where does Ruby end and where does Rails begin? It was a bit difficult for me to figure out. What is a background job, and do I need one? A lot of people were talking about testing, and I have no idea what to test. I understand the concept of testing, but I don't know what to do with testing. And finally, what on earth is a service object? I mean, come on. So I embarked on a tutorial journey. I read the Pickaxe book, I've followed the famous tutorials, I read the Agile Development with Rails book, I took some video courses, which was fantastic, by the way, that probably helped me the most. And I even went down a bit more advanced books on the Rails way as well. But while all of this is happening, which whole journey took about 12 months, I was dabbling in a lot of tutorials, but I wasn't really building or shipping anything. And it felt like progress, but it wasn't really a lot of progress. And while all of this is happening, I get a bit carried away with this idea of building things the Rails way, the proper way to build a web application. Some examples of this is that I got convinced that I have to use PostgreSQL enums in my database. So if for the likes and the bookmarks, I build these enums, but it turns out it's not that practical if you want to change anything, if you want to add or remove different types, then you have to go have a whole set of database migrations, so it was not entirely flexible. The other thing I did is I built a bit too much. For example, I thought it would be cool for people when they sign up to this website to dynamically have their usernames generated for them. But if two usernames match, then the system would be smart enough to generate or add some numbers to the end of it and so on, because it will be so popular that I would definitely run into this problem at some point. I built polymorphic associations with this kind of interactions because at some point just adding bookmarks or likes would not be enough, and I would have to have flexibility to have this across all my models, right? But one of my favorite ones, the site would be so popular across the world that I would have to definitely have a CDN to host my assets. And I went down rabbit holes trying to debug why are my assets not getting cached on CDNs. This is probably my favorite. I decided that since there's a lot of content on this website, I need a content management system. So I decided to build one from scratch. While all of my data previously, during my Next.js days, was in an Airtable. So instead of copying and pasting everything into my custom content management system, I decided to write a rake task that would import the data into my content management system, so in the future I would be able to use that content management system. Long story short, I managed to eventually launch the website, and it's got the sign-in functionality. You can add things, you can bookmark things, you can like things, and this whole process took about 3 months. And then I finally launched the website. But nothing happens. It's crickets. And it started to slowly occur to me that if you are building a content management, if you're building a website that's purely based on content, you need to solve that problem first. Eventually, a couple of months passed, nobody was visiting the website, I started to get annoyed, but I was also paying Heroku like $20 a month, and I was too cheap to keep paying it, so I said I'm going to convert it into a static website first and solve the content problem. I use Bridgetown, I already have the Airtable, I started pulling all the data from Airtable into Bridgetown, and just deployed it into the cloud. And it all worked out fine in the end. And turns out I didn't need any of the advanced functionality that I thought I needed. So a couple of lessons I learned from this experience. If you're building a website for that main purpose is to serve content, you need to solve that problem first, not any of the technology problems. The second thing is you definitely have to use the right tool for the right job. I think for this project, especially in the early days, Rails was a complete overkill. I would have probably been much better off if I started with a static website, and then if it became big enough, then I could switch to Rails and add more functionality later. And finally, sometimes building all these features is a form of procrastination in disguise, because it's so fun to go in a cave and think about all the cool things that you do, whereas the things that you really have to do, the boring stuff to turn that into a business and take it off the ground, it's not fun. So you don't really want to do it. With this experience, I'm like, okay, now I know what I'm doing. I'm experienced, I'm going to move on to the next project. This is around the time when OpenAI announces ChatGPT 3.5. I'm still doing a bit of consulting on the side. So my first thought was like, can I replace myself as a marketing consultant using ChatGPT? And how would that work? So I come up with this character called Lars. And the reason for that is because most agencies have a strategy guy that looks like this, who creates these elaborate decks, and it was kind of making fun of that guy. So this is your AI marketing guy. You tell it about your business objectives, and it tells you what you need to do for your marketing. You identify briefly what your business is, what it does, who your target audience is, and what your industry is. There are a couple of tools that you can use. It might help you build a user persona for your business. It can help you define your positioning against your competition. And it might help you come up with some ideas on what to do with marketing. This is around the time where I was starting to finally learn to differentiate between all the good advice, and relevant advice and not so relevant advice that I see online. One of them I saw quite often on the internet is single table inheritance being bad, because it ends up with database bloat, it results in messy queries, it's hard to refactor, and so on. It turns out, in my case, it was fairly straightforward and simple to do. I used Carmine's wonderful Ruby LLM library, and I decided to model everything as a chat. So all the interactions that you have, it would just create a new chat instance. And all the tools were essentially descendants of that chat class. And instead of coming up with database tables to store all the data, I just dumped everything into a JSON field. And probably not the right technical decision, but I was able to move fast and ship it, so it worked out well. The other advice I saw very frequently is that your marketing sites and your Rails application should be separate repos, and they should be on separate subdomains. So I did that. I built my marketing website using Jekyll. It was a static website hosted on the CDN. And my main application was on Ruby on Rails, and it was on an app subdomain. But there came a time where I decided to build some free tools for SEO, so people would be able to get a taste for what the app can do for you and hopefully sign up. But it was not so simple, because now you have to write JavaScript to make requests to the Rails application, which would handle the process and then return a JSON response. But once you go down, you have to learn about this thing called CORS, which is not fun, You have to define a contract between the Rails application and your marketing website. You need to figure out how to handle validation and errors. Analytics is a problem because when people come to the marketing website and they end up using the tool or maybe even making a purchase, how do you attribute it back to the initial visit? And finally, you have to write JavaScript. So in the end, I decided I don't need any of this complexity in my life. I decided to merge everything into the single repo. And it turns out, one Rails application, you could do this. You could just add a pages controller and add a method and define all the functionality in one method, and it gets the job done. The other advice I kept hearing, and this was getting very popular as well, that you need to self-host. So at that time I was on Heroku, and I thought, what's the thing that looks most like Heroku? And it turns out that thing was Doku at the time. So I rented a VPS on DigitalOcean. I had to figure out how to set up that VPS, and I set up Doku on it, and I started deploying. But it got complicated really fast, and I spent more than a week trying to make it work. Eventually, I said, you know what, Heroku is just $17 or something like that in a month. It's definitely worth it not to have to deal with this, so I went back to Heroku. While all of this is happening, time keeps on moving, and I need to ship. So it's about 2.5 months, and I don't know how to wrap it up and ship it. So I make a bet with a friend who's suffering from the same problem. We say we're both going to ship our apps in 2 weeks, and if one of us fails, we're going to pay the other one $500. And it turns out this is a really, really good motivator. In the end, we both, in these 2 weeks, I actually managed to integrate with Stripe as well, and it turns out it's not as difficult as I thought. I even embraced text enums and decided it doesn't have to be, not everything has to be the Rails way, it can be flexible. And I launched my application. I posted on social media, I tell people, now I'm exactly on the 3 months mark. I'm like, yes, I'm going to be rich now. About 2 weeks later, I get my first customer, and I get the Stripe notification. I'm like, yes, it's happening. But of course, it doesn't work out like that. After the initial hype, it starts to go down, and as over the months go, it's like, unless you really put a lot of effort into it, nothing grows on its own. And I got curious, why are people not using it? What's the matter? Why are people not paying for this? So I manually emailed every person that have signed up for the app, and I said, why did you sign up? Why are you not using it? What's the matter? What can I do to help? Tell me more. And it occurred to me, nobody wakes up in the morning and says, you know what? I need a marketing strategy. They have much more tangible, immediate problems that they are trying to solve, and marketing strategy is the least of their problems or not really on their radar. Then I decided to go down and do a bit of keyword research for SEO. And I found out that this domain is actually quite competitive. You have to beat a lot of websites with a lot of traffic before you can gain some traction. Eventually, I managed to figure some of this out and managed to improve the SEO and get some more traffic, but the whole journey could take anywhere from 6 months to a year. So some of the lessons I learned along the way, if you want to learn something, the only way to learn is to ship things. There is no substitute for getting things out into the world and trying to get feedback from real users that are trying to use your applications. The second mistake I did was not differentiating between vitamins and painkillers. Marketing strategy is a perfect example of a vitamin. It's not a strong enough problem for people to wake up in the morning to solve, such that they are going to end up paying for it. And the last one is marketing and building a brand and getting people to remember that you even exist takes a really long time. So ideally, you need to start marketing on day one when you have the first idea and start talking about it, because by the time you ship, it's going to be too late if you start talking about it by then. Now, on to the third project. I got all the lessons, and I speak with a friend who's spending a lot of time on image models and how to generate images using AI, and he doesn't know how to build web apps, and I'm learning how to build web apps, but I don't know anything about image models. We say, why don't we get together and build a project together? So we say, we are going to build an app that helps you generate tattoo designs. This time we did our research, and it turns out this looks like a really good opportunity because there's practically no competition and people are actively searching for tattoos online. So we started with actually building these SEO pages, this, I think they call it programmatic SEO, these landing pages dedicated to the terms that people are searching so that hopefully Google will rank us and we will get some traffic and we'll be able to convert that into paying customers. Around this time, I think DHH and the Rails world started talking about building your own authentication. And of course, I got excited about this as well and tried to do it, but turns out you need to write your own sign-up process, and you need to figure out how to do OmniAuth and all of that stuff on your own. So I said there must be an easy way, and I found this library called Authentication Zero. And I integrated this library, which solves all of these problems, but now you are responsible for maintaining that code yourself. And I decided I'm not interested in doing that either. So I went back to device, just so I can ship this project. And it turns out that worked well. I simplified the stack a little bit as well. Originally, I had a PostgreSQL database, and this was around the time when SQLite was getting a lot more attention with Rails as well, and turns out you can solve a lot of the problems with SQLite. I also went from Hatchbox to from Heroku to Hatchbox, which turned out to be a good solution because it's like a good middle ground between hosting it entirely yourself or outsourcing it completely to Heroku. It's a bit of best of both worlds. Eventually, we launched the app we posted on Product Hunt. We invest in SEO. There's some growth. It's a bit lukewarm. It takes a while. And the whole year passes, and we do absolutely nothing throughout this whole year to keep it growing. The renewal season comes, and now they want to charge us $50 for the domain. And I talked to my friend, what are we going to do about it? Do we want to keep investing in this? Are we going to do anything? And we decided we don't really care about tattoos. I don't have any tattoos. He has, but he doesn't spend his time thinking about tattoos. So he said, you know what, we're just going to decommission the app, send an email to all the subscribers and say thank you, and move on with our lives. So it really helped me to have a partner because the accountability, having this regular contact, helped to brainstorm ideas and also help you get out of your own head so you don't go down rabbit holes that want to take forever when your partner is asking, like, hey, have you shipped? Pursuing a genuine interest, it's not a requirement, but it definitely helps, because if you don't see yourself working on the same problem for a foreseeable amount of time, it's very difficult to keep the momentum going. And finally, you need to commit for the long haul, because building a business takes a long time, and you need to be able to invest a lot of time into making that product successful. Now, we came back a full circle. If you are trying to build a business, you need to start with building as little software as possible. And the reason for that is because code is liability. You may argue in the age of AI, you could just chuck it to Claude and you don't have to deal with it anymore, but you are still responsible for the code that lives in your code base. So if you start seeing code not as an asset, but as a liability, I think it really helps to be more responsible and mindful about what you build or improving the things that you build. The second thing is talking to customers as early as possible so that you can differentiate what are the real problems that people are ready to pay for versus what are the problems that people say, oh yeah, that's a great idea, I will totally buy that, and then they completely disappear once you launch your app. And finally, you need to figure out a way to commit for the long term, because this whole experience is a bit of a marathon and not a sprint. It's really fun to get something out in 2 months and share it with the rest of the world, but the real magic happens once you start investing time and effort into it, and once you see yourself growing together with that application. Now, I'm trying to practice what I preach. Last year, I went to Friendly RB. I met my co-founder, Jonathan, there, and we started building a competitor tracking tool called CoGrid. It helps you keep track of your competition, and it notifies you when they change their pricing, when they change their landing page, or when they post new jobs on their websites or update their newsletters and social media. If you're interested, go to cogrid.com, sign up for the newsletter, and we'll let you know once we manage to launch. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure being on the stage. Thank you.